The narcissist's whole life is one big conundrum. It's one big dilemma, and there's no real way out of it for them. That's why narcissists, they live their life as if they were just trying to keep their head above surface, of the water. They feel like they're almost drowning all the time. And even when things are working out well for them, it's always a matter of time before things either go south or they greatly fear that things will go south. A lot of it has to do with the fact that narcissists need supply for their survival, for their well-being, to to maintain themselves energized, to do basically anything they need to do. They need to have regular doses of supply to keep them going. But it's not just any supply. They need to always have at least one or two people who they consider to be good supply. And these people who would fall in the category of good supply, they're not always easy to come across, and over time it becomes more and more difficult for the narcissist to get them. But the real conundrum, the real dilemma, lies in the fact that the narcissist can never maintain good supply very long. For one reason or another, they can never maintain good supply very long, which means they always have to think about getting new supply, a new engine to keep them going. That's the purpose of the supply, is just to keep the narcissist energized, keep them somewhat balanced, to keep them, to help support their false view of themselves, that they are a great person. They want somebody to reflect back the good things to them, and somebody who's willing to take in all their negative projections so the narcissist can feel more balanced. That's what the good supply does. But the problem is, if the narcissist has a supply, if they have good supply, then one of two things will always happen in a relatively short period of time. And this is why the narcissist is in this ongoing dilemma, conundrum, when it comes to trying to keep good supply in their life, and they just can't manage to do it. So, on the one hand, if the narcissist does decide, if the narcissist does decide that they like the good supply, they like the job the supply is doing for them, they want to keep the good supply around, then if that person has even a little bit of a sense of self-worth, or just awareness of what's happening around them, it's only a matter of time before that good supply realizes they're dealing with somebody who's a bit sick in the head, who's mentally unhealthy. So the supply, usually it's just a matter of time before the supply walks away. And the narcissist really hates it when the supply walks away on the supply's watch, not the narcissist's watch, because they really rely on that person to energize them, to balance them, to be their doormat, really. They need somebody who plays that role. So, on the one hand, the good supply could simply walk away. But if you take a scenario where the supply doesn't walk away and ruin things for the narcissist in that way, what would happen is, after the supply's been around with the narcissist for some time, it doesn't take very long, and usually it can be as little as weeks or months, or sometimes years, but usually it's not very long before the narcissist, before they just see the person as boring and stale, not energizing the narcissist anymore, not playing that same role they used to play at the beginning. When the supply goes a bit bad, when the potency of the supply, potency in the sense of how well they can uplift the narcissist and make the narcissist feel good about themselves, when that potency drops, when the supply becomes boring and stale, then, to be honest, the narcissist doesn't really want to have much to do with the supply anymore. Obviously, if the supply has anything to offer whatsoever, oftentimes the narcissist will keep the supply in the background. Maybe keep them in the picture to be a proper doormat. Maybe the supply reaches a point when they're very stale and boring, where they don't offer almost anything to the narcissist. So that the only thing the narcissist can use them for is negative projection. Projecting their negativity onto the supply, because at that point the supply doesn't have anything else to offer. Whilst in the meantime, the narcissist is looking for secondary and other supplies in the background, people who again can uplift them. So that's the problem with the narcissist. One of those two scenarios will always play themselves out in a relatively short period of time. And when one of those two scenarios plays themselves out, then the narcissist is back at square one. And the narcissist is always planning around trying to make sure that they never fall into a very bad place because of that. Because the two scenarios, like I said, on the one hand, the supply might at some point see the narcissist and walk away. That's scenario one, and scenario two, on the other hand, what would happen if the supply didn't walk away? So the narcissist would eventually find the supply stale and boring, and the potency of that person's supply would have dropped tremendously. So then the narcissist basically doesn't want that supply anymore. Or if they want a supply, the supply would just play a very basic role, an important role, which is being a doormat, usually for negative projection. And sometimes the supply might do things for the narcissist, like cook, wash their clothes, if they live together, and do chores, basically, being a servant. So the narcissist is in that kind of conundrum where they need supply, they need potent supply to keep them going. It's fundamental to their survival. They need somebody to energize them. They need somebody to uplift their ego. They need somebody to help support their false self, the mask of their false self. They need somebody to take on their negative feelings. They need somebody to do all that. And it's hard to find people who do that. When they find someone who's willing to do that and is able to do that, they've come across good supply. But it's not very easy to come across such people. It's not very easy to trick such people to coming into such an entanglement. Because a lot of people would see through the narcissist. A lot of people have common sense. A lot of people have experienced similar things before. But the thing is, the narcissist really needs good supply. But they'll never ever keep good supply very long. Either because the person walks away, or the narcissist discards the person, or simply the person is no longer considered good supply in the eyes of the narcissist, which means they have to look for supply elsewhere. And it's a never-ending cycle. It just goes on and on, from one person to the next. And that's why the narcissist will always feel in an unsafe place, like things could, the potential impending doom, because things could always go south very soon, because they are so dependent on other people. Narcissists are some of the most needy, dependent people out there, but they like to come across as some of the most collected and independent people out there. But that's just nonsense. They're not at all. They are very needy, and very dependent. And they try so hard to show the opposite, but it's not true.